Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and a couple of weeks ago we had an expert from Pakistan to talk about the smog crisis and its implications, its causes, its impact on society in Pakistan, in Lahore in particular. Today, I figured we switch our focus east of the border into India's heartland, particularly Delhi and the Punjab region, which is facing the same crisis. This is a crisis of the heartland of the Punjab. I think in many ways, if you look at the air quality indicator data, it basically spreads from Peshawar all the way east of Delhi. Is sort of the smog crisis, and you can now see it from satellite imagery as well. And it keeps getting worse. So I figured we should cover both Pakistan and India in this conversation. So I have the honor of hosting Sunil Dahiya. He is founder of Envirocatalysts, somebody who has over a decade worth of experience in monitoring air pollution issues in India, looking at the causes for this crisis, and then also recommending ways in which the government and policymakers can deal with this crisis. So, for example, when he was at Greenpeace, they played a key role in getting India's clean air policy out in 2019. So some success, but this crisis keeps getting worse. And if you're watching it from India or Pakistan and you're facing this crisis of smog, I hope you and your loved ones feel better. Take care of yourselves, use air purifiers, etc., because it is really apocalyptic looking at the images from far away. So, Sunil, welcome to Pakistanomy, and thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you, Uzair, for having me. It's a pleasure talking to you, and I'm also really happy that there is a dialogue between these two regions, which have been facing the brunt of hazardous air pollution levels for so long. So I'm very honored to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
And yeah, it's a shared crisis, right? And I think like I want to learn and maybe start with learning from you about, well, what's causing this in India or in Indian Punjab primarily? Because when Abid joined the conversation and I spoke to him about what's causing this issue in Punjab on the Pakistani side, he said one interesting thing was that fuel quality and transportation is a big driver. Often the default is to blame the farmers, but his view was, at least on the Pakistani side, it's motorcycles, it's vehicles, it's diesel smog, and quality of cars and vehicles isn't checked as regularly. And Pakistan also has lower fuel standards than even India at this point in time. So I want to hear from you about, well, what are the main causes in India of this issue, given that we kind of from the outside here that fuel standards are better, some of the governance issues are there, but not as bad as perhaps on the Pakistani side. So help us understand what's causing this crisis on the Indian side.
No, I think Abid was right on point when he was mentioning that. Farmers are a scapegoat for this. And let me reframe that in a way that nobody, I don't think Abid or I will say that farmers or stubble burning doesn't contribute to the air pollution crisis which we see around this time. But that's not the only thing. Stubble burning only happens for at max around 4 weeks, but the peak burning will still be restrained to 2 weeks. So, and if you look at the air pollution situation, it's not just that during the winter time, both the geographies, India, Pakistan, face this air pollution crisis. The air pollution stays almost all throughout the year, apart from the rainy days, apart from the monsoon when the water is sprinkled in a long sustained duration over the pollution particles. But apart from that, it's polluted. What causes this pollution is transportation. Obviously, it's much more in Pakistan because of the fuel standard and the type of vehicles or the quality of vehicles there. India had slightly better fuel quality and Bharat 6, which is equivalent to Euro 6 norms. But still, transportation causes a lot of pollution only because the public transportation isn't enough to cater to the population of this geography. And if the registration of private vehicles, both cars and two-wheelers, is increasing, and the consumption of diesel and petrol is increasing over time, and now Bharat 6 came in 2020 all across the country. After that, there haven't been any groundbreaking technological advancements in the transportation sector or the fuel quality. And what that means is the gains which we had with Bharat 6 introduction in terms of reducing emission load from transportation sector, that is kind of neglected because of the increasing number of new vehicles registered, because of the increasing petrol and diesel consumption. And that's why we see transportation still plays a crucial role. Along with that, the industrial sectors, both small and medium scale industries, as well as coal-based power plants, which operate with inefficient pollution control technologies, and also the sheer capacity and quantum of manufacturing and power generation is increasing, and sadly, it's still heavily dependent on coal, particularly in India. And that becomes another reason of rising air pollution levels. Apart from these two, we all know that, or apart from three, transportation, power, and industrial sector, the waste, the way we are generating more and more waste with increasing population and unsustainable consumption patterns, and it's increasing more with the introduction of e-commerce, when a lot more is packed, given in sophisticated packings. So the waste generation is increasing. The waste is not segregated to the best extent, and what ends up happening is the wet waste, dry waste, all and the waste which can be recycled, all gets mixed up and has to be transported using polluting diesel trucks, and then has to be dumped at some site which is mostly burning almost all the time because of high methane and heat there, or it ends up being burnt in waste to energy plants, which again causes pollution. So not reducing waste at source, but finding ways to incinerate it and burn it. So waste sector contributes. Along with that, the construction, because most there is a high migration happening from rural areas to the urban areas, to Delhi NCR region as well, and that demands housing. And for housing, there is construction going on in the we can say satellite city, or in the outskirts of Delhi, in the cities like Noida, Gurgaon, Faridabad, and Sonipat. And that construction sector also contributes. Now, these are sources which contributes all throughout the year, and there haven't been any consistent technological advancements or shifting of fuel for controlling pollution from these sectors. And what happens is, during the winter time, when meteorology turns slightly unfavorable, when the universal layer comes in, when the wind direction becomes predominantly northwest, coming from Haryana, Punjab, or Pakistan, particularly that direction, and temperatures drop, that ensures that the whatever is emitted stays closer to the surface and moves very slowly, which ends up in buildup of high pollution level. Obviously, we cannot control meteorology. Meteorology is something which cannot be controlled. Artificial rain, water sprinklers, all are banded solutions or diversions. We can only control the emissions, and that is where I think we see a failure, that despite having national policies, despite having multiple programs, we are not able to reduce emission load from these perennial sources. Now, on top of that, with deteriorating meteorology, this episodic event of stubble burning definitely contributes. Over last few years, we had seen that stubble burning contribution had gone to up to 50% on a particular day. This year, the worst we have seen is 35% of a particular day was contributed by stubble burning, but mostly it's been around or less than 20%, which means that there is a little control over stubble burning, but it hasn't diminished, and there needs to be more which has to be done. The firecracker bursting around festive occasions, be it in October, November, or at the year end, contributes. But what we have to understand is that behind these farmers, behind these episodic events of stubble of firecrackers, or even I'll say that saying you and I or people in the cities drive car and that is causing pollution, all of that is true. All of that has to reduce. But what is happening particularly in India, and I'm sure that is the case in Pakistan as well, the bigger pollution sources, the industrial clusters, the administrative failure of providing better infrastructure for public transportation and non-motorized transportation, and the electricity generation facilities, be it heavily dependent on coal in India and coal and oil in Pakistan. So these big sources keep hiding behind these farmers, just firecracker burning, and individual car driver, people can only shift away from privatized modes of transport to public when there is public transportation, and that is severely lacking. Even in India, Delhi has really good metro connectivity, has increased number of buses over last few years, but the sheer population is so high that we haven't been responding to this crisis with the same intensity, or the scale and intensity of our response to this air pollution crisis. It's very low compared to the scale of emergency we face.
So that's very helpful, right? And I mean, as you were talking about transportation, like I remember during my trips to Delhi and you drive to Gurgaon and stuff, and you just stuck in traffic jams. You leave at 8 a.m., try to get to Gurgaon. Good luck getting there by 10. Those cars are just stacked on top of each other, basically, and doing what you were describing, right? Even if the fuel standard is good, you're still going to contribute to emissions, and meteorology cannot be controlled. I agree with you on that. I mean, even I was reading yesterday that, the Germans have a term for this in winter as well, when you have cloudy days and no wind, which means that their renewable production just collapses and they have to rely on natural gas to produce the power for heating and industry, etc. And it's a problem for them. Like when the sun's not out or the wind's not blowing for specific times of the winter month, you kind of have to solve for it differently, right? That's a
And
similar.
that's why India and Pakistan have geographical advantage, that we are in a geography where we will not have that kind of problem. We'll have sun almost
Yeah.
every day, until unless the smog and pollution kind of hides the sun behind dusty clouds.
Correct. Yeah, and I want to sort of ask one more thing. So, like another thing that Abid raised that sort of I don't often think about until he raised this, right, was this issue of fitness of motor vehicles on the road itself, particularly heavy and light trucks that transport things, goods. You said e-commerce, like other tankers, etc. How has that fared in terms of enforcement of fitness of vehicles? Because again, like in our part of the world, we know governance isn't that strong. So compared to like other parts of the world, like in the United States, Canada, or England, Germany, etc., once a certain age of the vehicle goes by, you gotta have the emissions test done, and then if it fails it, you have to do remediation or get rid of the vehicle, etc. What kind of progress has been made in India in terms of like ensuring fitness of vehicle? And I say this because another thing that, as I started digging into this on the Pakistani side, right, was that, okay, Pakistani Punjab may have certain levels of high fitness tests. It doesn't, but assume that it does. Then you have other provinces that might not be enforcing as much, right? So you still have goods coming in from a neighboring province like Balochistan or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where the trucks are not fit and they are registered there. So Punjab can't do much about that except issue a ticket, etc. But they're registered elsewhere. So who cares in any case? How is that evolved as a conversation in India around fitness of vehicles?
So that, I think, as I mentioned, that in India, particularly in terms of vehicle technology as well as fuel, there have been a lot of work done by different air pollution researchers and campaigners, and that has resulted into very high awareness and even government regulations on older vehicles. So Delhi and many other, at least 131 such cities and wider geographies around it, have a policy where you cannot run more than 10-year-old diesel vehicle. You cannot run more than 15-year-old petrol vehicle. If you run it, and if the police or regulating agencies spot it, they can impound the vehicle and you'll have to maybe walk off. So those kind of regulations are strong, but you are right in saying that the bigger goods vehicle and heavy vehicles are the bigger culprit, because most of those are still diesel. Most of those, we also have a huge population of those which are relatively old, and it is those vehicles which are old, which have old technology in terms of combustion, they contribute highly to air pollution. Now, there are different ways how there is an attempt to mitigate that, or at least reduce the pollution exposure of public because of those vehicles. What happens in, or that not just in Delhi, what is happening in most Indian cities is that earlier there used to be GT roads or big highways which used to pass through the city, and all these trucks which are not even destined to go to a particular city. For example, if a truck is not destined to come to Delhi, it has to go from Rajasthan to Haryana or Punjab to Uttar Pradesh. Earlier, it used to pass through Delhi. And now, what has been done over last decade is there have been multiple peripheral highways or expressways which have been made, so that only the vehicles which are destined to enter a city enters that city. Otherwise, they take the external routes and go don't come into the populated regions, and that's how a little bit of exposure is reduced. The other thing which is happening, and that you'll see changing very fast in India, is that particularly the e-commerce that particularly in Delhi has mostly been shifting to electric vehicles. You'll see a rise in registration of three-wheeler pickup electric vehicles which are used by Flipkart, Amazon, and all those delivery partners. So that's going on in on a big scale. There is a lot of emphasis right now, which has also been directed towards converting these older polluting diesel trucks into electric trucks, and for that you need to have infrastructure in terms of highways and charging stations around the highways and all those things. So there is a lot of work happening on that. What this tells us is that there is an acknowledgement that older heavy vehicle or goods vehicle contribute highly to any pollution from the transportation sector in any city, and that has to be reduced. Now that can be done in multiple ways: one, by shifting the fuel itself; second, by adopting more efficient or phasing out the older vehicles and bringing in new vehicles. Bharat 6 is way less polluting than Bharat 4, which is very, very highly polluting. So there is that migration happening. The older vehicles are taken off the road. There is electrification, at least of the smaller vehicles within the cities. And there are these peripheral highways created so that their emissions are not directly in the nose of the public. So there are multiple efforts being taken for that.
I want to
And
switch to
it's fairly uh, good. But again, I think the electrification of uh, heavy vehicles and goods vehicle, which is powered by renewable energy, because on the highways we have huge land available, and there is thinking going on that route as well. Once that happens, we'll definitely see I think progressive emission reduction from the goods transport sector in transportation.
So I want to switch to something that I've been thinking about increasingly, right? As you pointed out before we hit record, and all of us talk about this, right? This is over a decade old problem now. We've gone from poets writing about the fog season as being this beautiful time of the year in the Punjab, right? Like I grew up reading this. I'm sure you grew up with this as well. And it used to be like this used to be actually something people like. I grew up in Karachi, right? People would like to go to the Punjab or in Lahore in particular during this time of the year because it's cooler, but also there's a romanticism in our culture about the morning fog and things like that. And now we've had this for over a decade where it has become it's almost like a really, really bad crisis. People escape now from this region, right? I have friends of mine who are like, okay, I'm going into the northern mountains for the next 6 weeks because I just can't breathe and I have asthma and I have other things. To which led me to think about the fact that, when you look at China went through this crisis, one party state controlled sort of no real free expression allowed relative to our part of the world. But there was huge public pressure on the government to do something about it. And that's actually what led them to act on this, like to a large degree. It wasn't that the Chinese Communist Party woke up one day and said, oh, this is terrible for our people. The pressure was real from the ground up. And then I was talking to this with a friend of mine and like wondering why we haven't had this sort of thing. We've had anti-corruption movements, we've had religious movements, we've had other types of movements that have put pressure on politicians to do something about things people care about. But over a decade into this crisis that keeps getting worse, there really isn't a public protest type movement on either side of the border related to this crisis, where people are saying, solve this, or we're going to kick you out of power or do other things. And my friend jokingly said, well, maybe it's because Chinese have only one child and they care more about that one child because the government ensures that there's a control. He was being tongue in cheek, and we just laughed a bit. But on a serious note, why is it that so much has keeps getting worse? People keep getting sick. Their children are out of school. They have to spend so much money on healthcare just in the immediate term. Forget about long-term health challenges. But there isn't a public pressure campaign in the way in which we've seen on other topics in the past. Why is this the case?
So, before we start on this, this is not just a decade, particularly for Delhi. We have known it very well that around 2001, 2002 was the first big movement on air pollution in India and in Delhi particularly, when all of the diesel buses were kicked out of the city because of high air pollution levels. And that really helped reduce pollution in Delhi for next few years. But eventually what happened was the privatized transportation, the buses number of buses wasn't enough. The private transportation picked up, people got more bikes and cars, and that resulted into increasing pollution again. And what also happened sadly around that time was that the entire focus was on transportation, and focus was still within the city. uh, Even the campaigning groups and the research groups didn't really focus on how air pollution really builds up. They didn't really work on the larger regional sources, and the industry, the power plants, all of those things were out of the public narrative and even research, I would say, for that matter. And that resulted into set while there was a bit of pressure on the transportation sector, the industry and the coal-based power plants kept coming up in the larger rate set, and that resulted into again hazardous levels of pollution. Now Delhi had a very interesting movement around 2014 when the World Health Organization report came out, and that pegged Delhi as the most polluted uh, capital in the world, the most polluted city in the world. And that was also the time when Delhi again experienced very severe hazardous smog and pollution levels. And that resulted into the organized campaigning organization as well as research organization kind of waking up, and they started doing some work on air pollution, which resulted into media kind of being catalyzed. And you'll see between 2014 to 2019, I'll say, you'll see an increasing awareness. You'll see an increasing pressure on the government being built by all the stakeholders, starting from research organization to the campaigning organization, public, activists, and media. So that was happening, and it is only because of that pressure that India had a national clean air program in 2019. So I wouldn't say that there haven't been any kind of movements or momentum from the public side. But sadly, what happened was it took a lot of work to mobilize people to ask questions. And secondly, when people were not seeing or they were not realizing that air pollution ultimately kills them and has having a toll on their health. So that took some time. And when COVID hit, they saw people dying the moment they were breathing. And that was again another turning point in the air pollution campaigning landscape in India, where after that, first the industrial activities or manufacturing activities were down, pollution levels were down, and then it took some time to for that to pick up, and people, the economy, the socio-economic condition of the people really took a hit. And we have to understand that in India, Pakistan, or in South Asia, there are like people don't get food to eat. People can't go to school. People can't afford good health facilities. There are no jobs. There are lots of issues, and that's why air pollution, at least till now, wasn't even be able to be where it was in 2019, particularly. This year is slightly different, and it gives me hope that we see increasing questions being asked. We see increased media coverage. We see increased research groups also speaking about it. So the momentum is building, but there is a little difference between how it worked in China and isn't working in India. And that difference lies in the fact that China saw itself as a superpower, as somebody who can lead the world after US and Europe did in earlier times. It saw itself as a leader, and to be a leader, you have to showcase what you can do at the international platform, and I think that worked for China. It Yes, there was public pressure, but they also wanted to be the global superpower and tell the world that we can tackle anything we face, we can do anything. While India is making that attempt, it somehow goes on a really good track. There was a momentum when coal-based power plants were not being coming up again between 2018 to 2022. The number of coal-based power plants coming up reduced. Delhi was seeing a decline in diesel and petrol consumption and all those. So we see these good momentums building up, but that doesn't get carried forward and we lose that focus. I feel while India still has ambition to be a Vishwaguru or to be leading the world, we somehow fails in responding to the internal public health emergency, which has definitely given a bad name. We have seen multiple ways of this being depicted by multinational companies, the foreign embassies. You'll see some companies making statements that we don't want to be in Delhi because it's polluted. Other diplomats or embassies in past have said that you'll be given hardship allowance if you are based in Delhi. Certain big journalists from New York Times or Guardian or other big publications have shifted out of Delhi because it is polluted. So that gives a bad name, and that is what China didn't want it. And that's why they were able to solve it. They also acted on the emission reduction at source rather than trying to beat around the bushes and continue with the status quo. So there is a little shift which we need, shift in terms of the national thinking, the policymakers thinking of how do we want to portray our country. For Pakistan, again, it's going through so many different challenges. So until unless, see, people will never just vote for air pollution. There are other issues which are plaguing this society, and those will always take the center stage. Air pollution can be one of them, but will and this is what politicians realize and understand, that people are not going to vote us out just because we didn't work on air pollution. So it also has to come from top down centrally, saying that hey, we don't want bad name for ourselves in the international community, we want to be the world leaders. And for that to be done, first we have to care for our citizens health, and we have to reduce it. And then, like, India has all good policies on paper, it's just that we fail in implementation, and that has to change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add one more point to your excellent points of saying, well, the elites in India and Pakistan live in Delhi and Lahore. And I'm like, hey, if you can't go out into the parks that you have built to enjoy your own lives, like maybe just do it for selfish reasons too, right? Like air pollution is going to impact you maybe a little less because you have fancy air purifiers and air conditionings in your home than somebody who's poor and lives as a daily wage earner because they just don't have that privilege. But still, if you're living in a city like Lahore and Delhi and you are in a position of privilege, you kind of also want to go out and enjoy nature or your own city.
Them going out is sending their kids to Europe or US for
That's the
studying.
thing. That exactly the problem. And I'm like, be a bit selfish about your own, surroundings and improve it as well. In addition to the points you made, which I agree with. It's
The other
interesting.
interesting thing is air pollution is such a leveler that people used to like these elites wanted to escape Delhi pollution, and particularly around Diwali, when earlier the situation used to get worse, everybody will start asking, "Hey, where should we go? The air pollution season is coming. We want to escape it. Can you suggest a city where pollution is less and we can go there?" So a lot of people used to do this, but air pollution is such a good leveler that this year all these people who traveled out of Delhi around that window of beginning October, beginning November to escape pollution. They came back after a week, and the worst ever pollution episode experienced in last few years started hitting on 13th of
And
November and
everyone was
continued.
back.
So,
Yeah. Well,
welcome back.
it's kind of like the British going to Shimla in the colonial Raj era to escape the heat, right? This has become this phenomenon in South Asia, or at least in the northern northwestern Indian subcontinent. I want to switch to something interesting you said as we conclude this conversation, that this is an inflection point. I fully agree that this is an inflection point across the region, because not only has it gotten way worse, right? But you're right in the sense that post COVID kind of things had improved a bit naturally because of lower activity, and now we're back up fully, right? And I still the main visual, if there was one among so many insane ones out of the pandemic, was that you could see the mountains from Jalandhar again because the air had cleared. And I remember seeing that and being like, an entire generation of Indians and people in that part of the world had never seen these mountains in their lives
In
because
Delhi could see blue skies.
exactly,
That
right? So, people are, and now we are at such a bad place in terms of this crisis, that this conversation has picked up momentum. As you said, it's an inflection point. From your point of view, you're an expert in this space. Always there are more things that can be done. What are sort of like two or three of the top priorities that the broader community has of saying, we're at an inflection point and this is the moment to get these things done? Not just at the policy level, but as you said, implementation is always the trickier problem here. So help me understand what's on the docket in terms of using this moment to achieve something positive, so that progress is made next winter and then the winters thereafter.
it's very interesting that I don't think there is any lack of data or tools to be able to respond to this crisis and really solve it. Though India has National Clean Air Program and it's coming up for revision next year, and that is why, and Pakistan, like I might be wrong, but what I have seen is this year has been very different for Pakistan as well compared to past years in terms of the debate and narrative and discussions which are going on, and that's why this is an interesting juncture in time when this region can come up. India can revise its policy. Pakistan also can revise its smog action plan and national clean air policy uh, in a way that though Indian National Clean Air Program say that we have to reduce pollution level by 40% compared to 2019-20 by 26, but it doesn't say how will you reduce it. It just lists many things. The air pollution improvements will only happen when you reduce the absolute emission load. So what we need to do is we need to start talking about and being transparent about how much is emitted from which sector in which geography. And I understand that we cannot start reducing it from tomorrow because we cannot shut down the economy, we cannot shut down the country, and the emissions might still increase for next few months. But if we say that from a year from here, you can reach a maximum of this emission load from transportation sector, from industries, from power plants for Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, Lahore, or whatever geographies, you name it. And then from there, you cannot go beyond it. You have to start reducing those emissions because we cannot change meteorology, and to improve air quality, we have to change emissions. So we need to adopt a absolute emission load reduction approach for polluting sectors and geographies. Second, what we also need to do is we have to give up on this mentality of that let's clear or clean everything within the city and that will resolve our problem. Air pollution doesn't recognize the administrative or political boundaries. It has to be a larger airside based action plan. Though we can say that Delhi's airside is about 300 to 400 kilometer radius region, but it keeps changing, and I feel Lahore, Punjab, Haryana, all of this will fall in one larger airside. So there has to be a regional or airside based action. There has to be collaboration at the provincial, at the state level, as well as the international level. The third thing which is very interesting is that though we have multiple policies to reduce air pollution, this policy doesn't have legal backing. There is nobody who's held accountable for inaction. This is also a difference from China, where the promotion of the people in the regulatory boards was linked to how well do they perform in terms of reducing air pollution levels.
Or
So
like,
what
for
we
example, if I may interrupt, in the US, I think this happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s onwards, the Clean Air Act and all of the legislation around it became, it was enforceable by law. So it wasn't just a policy fiat that was there.
Yeah. So India and for that matter Pakistan also have the Air Act and other things which have never been implemented the way they are. Air Act in India had the provision of initiating criminal proceedings against the polluters, but we rarely saw any criminal proceeding being registered under the Air Act since 1980s. And the only few which we have seen are also because of the Supreme
So,
Court.
so I don't know if you, again, sorry to interrupt, but this reminded me. I don't know if you know the number off the top of your head for Delhi, but I was watching a TV show earlier this week on Pakistan, and in Lahore, the total number of people responsible for enforcement of the motor vehicle standards, doing spot checks, impounding, etc., is two. That's it.
Just,
There are two
just
people.
imagine
You
how
can't do it. You can't just do it.
two people can't even report whatever they saw on the road when they go out, and that is the situation. Most of the pollution control boards in India are also highly understaffed, even according to their current capacities what they should have. Delhi has only about 40% of the staff. So how do you imagine enforcement through such a weak pollution control committee? And this is all according to the older numbers. If we have to have good enforcement, we need to enhance their capacities. And even if there are officers there, they don't have the technical know-how of how do they really tackle the air pollution problem. And even if sometimes they impose fines on some polluting activities, the polluter goes to the court and takes a stay. And we have come to such a time when depending on different pollution levels, Delhi has a graded response action plan. So when you are at around 100 microgram, 150 microgram, grab stage 2 introduced. Then if it increases to 200, grab stage 3 comes in. If it increases beyond 250 microgram, grab 4 comes in. So depending on the severity of pollution, there are actions which are supposed to be taken. And you will be amazed to know that under stage 2, which is kind of the initial stage, there is an action which says that because the pollution levels have increased, so we direct the authorities to close down all the polluting industrial activities which are operating illegally in the region. So the interesting thing is that if there are, you already know that they are illegally operating, why didn't you close them down earlier? Because you don't have staff, you don't want to do it, or there is no implementation of policy.
No,
So
it's easy. I mean, it's also easy to take a bribe, right? I mean, this is the thing that brick kilns are back in the conversation in Punjab, in Pakistani Punjab, because they're informal and they're not supposed to be operating. And I'm like, forget about pollution. Brick kiln operators are known for employing slave labor, which under the law is illegal and is a hugely punishable offense. And I think ILO estimates say that there are like hundreds of thousands of citizens that are in these slave labor type jobs in the brick kiln sector alone. Forget about everything else. And I'm like, why are they operating? They're operating because clearly someone's paying off people and they're part of the political economy, and that's what needs solving. And if you think slave
it is.
labor is related to this, so is air pollution in the same way.
And also, like, if not slavery, in certain regions, at least the conditions which they work in aren't really that well. And this is a reality not just in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, like the entire region faces this. So brick kilns are another major source of pollution. Obviously, there are some upgradation going on, and there are also like now, at least in India, I have heard and I have seen certain regions where there are campaigns, there are discussions to improve the quality of the residents which they have, the education for the kids and all those things. So it's happening, but these are just a few coal-based power plants, steel facilities, cement facilities, or brick kilns. They are well known. They can at least be talked about, and you can kind of get some data about them. But just try to understand so many SMEs, MSMEs, which nobody even talks about, and there are such a high amount of coal, oil, or other fuels being burnt in these industries in a diffused way. So what we need is, and all of these industries, the pollution control boards and committees knows no industry can operate without their consent. They have to have their geo coordinates. And particularly in India, most of the polluting activities have to have continuous emission monitoring systems. So you know where they are, you know whether they are operating or not, you know how much are they emitting, you know where the wind is going to come from over next 3 to 5 days. If with all this information you are not able to reduce their operation, restrict their operation, and restrict the pollution coming from them, that means only two things. One, you don't have the capacity to enforce, and you need to have more people on ground. Second, you have no intent to do it. Whichever is true, it has to be resolved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And on that note, I hope that, some progress is made. I agree we are at an inflection point. I mean, there are now towns and cities that, you're seeing 1,000 microgram levels of data that even last year wasn't the case. Like Multan in Pakistan, for example, was in the news recently as being worse than Lahore. And it was like, hey, this is southern Punjab. Like it didn't used to extend this far south as a yes, there were growing pollutions and we knew the numbers were inching up, but we reached a level that it was unimaginable. If somebody told me in the summer that Multan is the city you would be talking about, I would be like, no, like not going to happen because of various factors, but here we are. Before I let you go, I always ask my guests, Sunil, what are 2 or 3 books you would recommend for the audience? They can be on any topic, but it's always a fun way to end the conversation for me.
Yeah. Before that, I will also like to say this last thing, that I am a bit optimistic. And I'm optimistic that this problem will be resolved. And why I say so is not primarily because the politicians will start caring for environment and public health or whatever. The economy of the region is linked to how well you'll be responding to these crises. And I feel that all the polluting fuels, economy is not favoring them. It will not favor them, and that is will be forced to move to cleaner fuel, will be forced to move to public transportation. And that is when and that's going to happen in next few years. So I'm very, very hopeful that this crisis will be solved. Coming to the books, I think in terms of books, Choked by Beth Garner is one book which is on air pollution, talks about multiple geographies and multiple sources of pollution in a very, very interesting way. So that's a book which I always recommend when somebody asks me. The other thing, there is a book called Breathless, which is interesting. I forgot the name of the author. And there is one documentary which kind of changed China, that was Under the Dome. I think everybody must see that, and that really moved a lot of things within
Yeah, and if
China.
I remember, the Chinese government actually pushed it as well to,
It was taken off within a week.
yeah. And
So
but then did they later, or was this something else? Because I know that Under the Dome had some controversy, but then at some point they owned it up and decided that this was going to be okay, or maybe it's something else. I'm confusing, but I
it's still there.
remember
It's on
still there.
YouTube.
Okay.
Can be watched with English subtitles. But it's a really, really interesting documentary. So
Okay. Well, thank you for those recommendations. I remember watching Under the Dome back in the day, so maybe it's time to revisit it as well and think about what happened there. But again, thank you so much for your time. This was a wonderful conversation, and I hope we can continue this dialogue to keep going. And maybe as I tell people both in Pakistan and India that the air and micrograms don't care about the LOC. So you share the meteorology, the air doesn't have borders. So you might as well work together on this because it's killing both of your people. So maybe we can start this conversation and continue it with folks like Abid and others. And at some point, governments also decide that it's better to talk about these things and collaborate because that's the only solution.
yeah, I really look forward to that. And actually, people like Abid, Dawar, and now others, like I and Dawar have worked together for so long on multiple issues. Abid and I have collaborated on multiple things, but I see a much more enhanced and heightened need for this to happen. So when we say that governments are not responding with the same intensity to the emergency that it requires, it's also true for collaborations among researchers, civil society, and media. uh, I am hopeful that that will also increase
Yeah,
while.
yeah. Let's always hope for the best. And I, like you, I'm optimistic always. So again, with that, hopefully next season is better and that progress continues. But in the meantime, thank you for your time. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you, Uzair. Thanks for having me.